AIM-listed Atome is the first and only pure-play developer of international green fertiliser projects. It's based here on the London Stock Exchange. It's aiming to decarbonise the fertiliser sector with its pipeline of projects across Latin America. We're talking now to Chief Executive Olivier Mussat, who joins us here in the studio. Welcome.
Good morning.
We've only spoken online before, so it's a pleasure having you here in the studio. Talk to us a little bit about the market for green fertiliser, because we don't hear an awful lot about it being so relatively new.
That's correct. So fertilizer itself, right, number one, it's a very large market. It's a $200 billion per year market. It's what feeds us, right? Half of the world's fertilizer come from energy, from natural gas. So half of the world's fertilizer are highly carbonated. And what you see now is with the advent of a hydrogen economy, you realize that you can make, thanks to hydrogen, green fertilizers, zero carbon fertilizers. And so increasingly, it's all about greening a sector which represents more carbon than aviation and shipping combined. So I think everybody has heard about trying to green our flights, trying to green the shipping side. Greening fertilizer wasn't really in the mind of people when it's actually completely possible today with existing technologies today.
But taking your other examples of transportation, of heating homes and stuff, it's not a very efficient use of hydrogen. Is it more efficiently applied to the process of producing green fertilizer?
Absolutely. And the idea is with hydrogen, it's a base molecule, you make derivatives. And one of them is ammonia. With hydrogen, you make green ammonia. And today, 80% of the world's production of green ammonia is solely focused towards fertilizers. So for us, it was always about, if you can have green hydrogen, you can have green fertilizer, and you can have a piece of that $200 billion a year market.
That's a lot of money per year as well. That's not so. Okay, how much of that at the moment is green, or how much is likely to be green in a few years' time?
So today, it's really a tiny, tiny proportion. I mean, we're talking less than 0.1%. And what we have seen is the push of the food industry, the Nestlés, the Mars, the Tropicanas of this world to go greener is important because they have made commitments, climate commitments. But actually, the easiest way to meet these climate commitments is to reduce their carbon footprint that they are doing through fertilizer. Right? So, for example, 1 ton of green fertilizer represents anywhere between 2 to 4 tons of carbon. So if you can green that into your agri, you can really fast track your decarbonization attitude. The other point is, obviously, this is the carrot, but now let's talk about the stick. And with the CBAM, so the carbon border adjustments that were implemented in Europe and in the UK from 2026 onwards, has put fertilizer as one of these sectors which will have very high punitive taxes on the import side. So you really have suddenly a stick and a carrot coming together.
Yeah. Talk to us about the project. Based in Paraguay, I said it's in Latin America, it's Paraguay. We have, as I say, spoken about this before. Give us some updated developments of what's going on and how you're pushing it forward.
Correct. So why Paraguay? Right. So it's, first of all, it's part of the Mercosur, which is Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. This is one of the largest breadbasket of the world. It is the largest import region of fertilizer. Like they import over 30 million tons of fertilizers. So that's the demand side. However, on the supply side, how do you make green fertilizer? You need green electricity. And Paraguay is where you have the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world. It's called Itaipu, part of the Iguazu fault. So it's about 14 gigawatt. And it is very competitively priced power. So if you can have power in excess, renewable power in excess at reasonable prices, you can make green fertilizer at very competitive prices. So which is why Paraguay, and obviously deliver these fertilizers in the regional market, which is huge, right? But also because you can produce it at such competitive rates, you can go all the way to Europe as well. So that's really how the country is, how the macro environment of this is. The other side, of course, is the project itself. So we started 2.5 years ago. And since then, we have now signed the power purchase agreement for the first project, 145 megawatt, which will represent about 250,000 tons a year of fertilizer. So it's not nothing. We have bought the land. We have finished the environmental social impact assessment studies. We have been granted the environmental and operating license because we are doing everything at World Bank IFC standards. And also we have been granted a tax-free zone status. So That's kind of what's been happening in Paraguay. On the project side, on the engineering, we've been working with Casale, who is the oldest ammonia and fertilizer technology company in the world. It's over 100-year-old, and Urbas to develop the engineering of the project. So now we have a final stage of the engineering and procurement, what we call the EPC. And also on the financing side, we're also on the final stages of the financing. And so the next step for us is actually basically going into the offtake agreement. So finding the fertilizer company which will buy our production and then distribute it.
What sort of appetite are you getting from those that might be buying the product?
So as far as the appetite, it's a pretty wide appetite because we are the most advanced project globally. Right, bar none. And although you've had a lot of progress made on different fronts, because we started earlier than anybody else, and because we are able to leverage existing resources, we really are, at the pointy edge of the sector. So we've had a lot of discussions, and they have taken quite a while because we have to do obviously a lot of education. And at the moment, we really are, within. It's very difficult to give targets because obviously they move very quickly, but we really are at the final stages when it comes to the offtake agreement, which is absolutely key. At the end of the day, we have to prove to the market, to everybody, that what we have been saying is correct, that our thesis is correct, and that the fertilizer market also agrees that it is correct.
Clearly, there's a lot of potential for this market. You talk a lot about the reasons why you're in Paraguay, and it certainly seems like a compelling argument to do the project there. Is what you're doing replicable in other regions of the world? Because you talk about some of the green energy that's coming in, it lowers your carbon footprint generally. That's not always available in other jurisdictions.
No, and especially we've seen the difficulties we've had in the UK ourselves, right, with wind auctions, having had a lot of difficulties. So this is kind of why the reason, we are in Latin America is because you have these unique situations where you can leverage existing power, existing grids, green grids, which is why, our second project, which has been announced recently, which will be in Costa Rica, is very much a copy-paste of what we are deploying in Paraguay. And whilst we take zero technology risk in what we do, like there is no specific, intellectual property on the technology side because we really want to de-risk everything. What we have is a unique, let's call it business development IP, that we try, we've created in Paraguay because it was the lowest hanging fruit, and now we are copy-pasting it into other places, and Costa Rica being the most recently announced place.
Yeah, and how far developed is that path, if you like, towards production?
So, as I mentioned earlier, we've been working in Paraguay for over 2.5 years to get to where we are today, and we are, very, very closely to reaching the point that is called, ready to build final investment decision. And so we are roughly, let's say, the equivalent of where we were about a year and a half ago in Paraguay, which is, very, very advanced discussion with a power company in Costa Rica, relatively advanced discussion with the off-takers as well. From the engineering point of view, as I mentioned, we will copy-paste what we have now done in Paraguay. So you would expect this project that whilst, we will be in production by the end of 2026 in Paraguay, if we follow the same trend, we will be looking at something end of 27, early 28 for Costa Rica.
Okay, let's assume that you get to where you need to be and you are starting production. Are you only going to supply the local market? Is there potentially for export here, or is it just going to be local market? I'm thinking about the longer term picture. Like you say, you're starting in Costa Rica. What's to stop you doing it in a good jurisdiction in Europe, for example, where we can then get European fertilizers down the green route?
Correct. So, well, that point is a very important point, right? So in the early stages of that green market, the definition of what is a green premium is yet to be done because that market hasn't really known what to pay for it. And so the advantage that we have selling regionally, into Brazil, into Paraguay, into Argentina, is we are working in a market which has to pay a very high cost of import from the US, from the Middle East, from Europe for carbonated fertilizers. But actually, we know roughly that the price of carbon per ton is going to be around $100 to $200 equivalent, and just for carbon price of it. So, and we know that for us to ship our production from Paraguay into the UK, into Europe, will be under $100 a ton. So can we make it economically into the UK, into Europe? Yes, we can. Right, so that from a supply point of view, and still be quite competitive. When it comes to developing our projects or the similar projects into, let's say, into the UK, for example, the cost of power and green power is still relatively high. And at the end of the day, you have to compete with the local grid. So you have to work in places where you have excess power. And I think we've all seen our price of power as, for our housing go up significantly. So if you create too much, it means that there's only so much space that you can play with, and especially go fast, because you need to have more generation. So keeping things very simple, very focused, leveraging existing resources, not having to depend on authorizations. Let's call it also an element of NIMBYism as well. Latin America allows us to get a lot faster, and also enables us to deliver fertilizer into the UK, into Europe a lot faster as well.
That's an interesting point about NIMBYism. I hear this a lot in obviously normal construction and everything else. But what's a plant look like? What's it do in terms of the local environment, for example? If there are people that say, well, we don't want that here, what is it that you're doing that they don't like?
So the advantage that we have, as I mentioned, we're using what is called the IFC performance standards, which were developed by the World Bank, which makes sure that your project has the right environmental standards and the right way to deal with regional and local communities. So it's a relatively small footprint of a project. We're only talking about 30 hectares, so it's not huge at all. Where it can become quite big is if you have to have your own renewable power production. And 145 megawatt, this is our phase one, and we will have another phase in Paraguay of 300 megawatt. This would take a huge amount of space, right? So that footprint itself would become huge. We don't have that problem where we are. But the process itself, right? We take power, we take electricity, we take water, that becomes hydrogen. We take nitrogen from the air, that's again a very, very mature process. We make ammonia through the Haber-Bosch process. With the ammonia, we then make nitric acid, and then with the nitric acid and the ammonia, you make ammonium nitrate, which becomes calcium ammonium nitrate. So you've got 5 processes, which are relatively small footprint, but have to be managed very, very properly. We've been dealing with all of this process for over 100 years. So we don't have any problem, and even if, when it comes to, if you were to do something similar in the UK or Europe, the footprint is small enough, the emissions are very well known, so that would not be the problem. The NIMBYism problem would come if you have to look at the power, and whether it's the generation of power, also the transmission lines. If we want to go more green in the UK and in Europe, we will need a lot more transmission lines, and obviously this goes over people's homes. Right? So this is kind of one of the problems you have to deal with.
Is there a very high bar of entry into this? There's very few competitors, aren't there, on the market? In fact, I think you're the only listed company, aren't you, that has this exposure to green fertiliser. What are the other companies like? How long up through the path are they to doing it?
So there's only 2 companies who have now been created, dedicated to green fertilizer, and both of them are still private. One is in Europe and the other one is in the US. And it's been quite interesting because we are kind of a trailblazer. Because we are publicly listed, we are very transparent in what we do. So there's been a fair amount of copy-paste, right? That's one part as a really pure play developer. The other side is you look at the very large companies like Yara, like CF Industries, and like Fertiglobe, which is Emirati fertilizer company. These are very large companies who have been doing everything with high carbon footprint, and now they want to go green. And which is the advantage for us is these are the people we want to partner with, because we've done things earlier than them, and we are very interesting to them because they have their own inertia. So it's much better to partner with somebody like us than create their own departments.
Do you have your own proprietary and patented way of doing this? Or it's a well-trodden path. You say the chemistry. Yes. We've known about the chemistry
Correct.
For hundreds of years, so that's nothing new. But do you have anything that's proprietarily owned, which would be of interest to these companies to possibly end up buying Atome?
So there's no such thing as IP itself that you would patent, right? It's just a different way of doing business. And the fact that we as a team have taken a very integrated view where we wanted to have complementary team members. Somebody who has done energy, somebody who has done infrastructure, somebody who is a very, recognized expert on fertilizer, you name it, right? So it's putting all of these things together where, in essence, we are integrators of what is, our projects which never had to live with each other. Green energy and fertilizer becoming green fertilizers. So I think it's our special sauce and the way we are doing things relatively fast. Would we be a target for these guys? We can only hope so in a way,
we'll
right?
Have to see, yeah.
But the reality is what we are developing is also a way of right-sizing projects and copy paste, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's really about going these places where you have disconnect and specific advantages which enables you to hit the market right now. And it's something that even in my previous career, we looked at hard, which is where are these pockets where you do have arbitrage opportunities, where you can do things very differently, and where you can move faster. And the fastest way to a gigawatt of capacity for us is 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100. If you go 1 gigawatt today, it will be too big for the existing markets, and you are becoming hostage to engineering and to markets. And this is really remember, right? This is the hydrogen point of view at the beginning of it. Hydrogen is having a hard time delivering on its promises because they don't have a market.
Yeah.
We took it the other way around. We say, where is the market? And then let's go after that market with hydrogen.
Sounds like there's a lot of possibility for the company and the market. Let me just quickly take a look at the share price chart. Now, I would say that the 2023 year started right in the middle of this chart. I would say last year on AIM, it was disastrous for so many companies, and so many companies were taken down. And you may say that you've been taken down beyond where the reasonable market is. What would you say to investors looking at this as an investment opportunity when you've got a share price of 43.6 at the moment here in London? Where's the mispricing? What is it the market doesn't understand about what you're doing?
So I think there's a sector point of view first, right? As I mentioned earlier, the hydrogen sector as a whole has overpromised and underdelivered. And so are we in that mix? Of course we are, right? The other side is what the market we feel is mispricing, and I don't think you've had any CEO ever say that his share was fairly priced, is also the fact that we are also unique not only in our business plan, and the fact that the management has always put money into the company and continues to do so. And we did so in the last raise. So we are completely aligned with what the company is doing, wants to achieve. And obviously, our incentive is very much that we have a fair amount of our skin in the game, if not a huge amount of skin in the game. So we do recognize that we listed at 80, and with the amount of work we have done since and what we have achieved, it makes no sense for us to be listed at 40 on an absolute basis. So markets are market, that's very clear. But we know where we are. We know what we are going to be delivering this year and actually over the next few months. So this is when really the point of inflection will be, is getting to that point where we announce who the off-taker is, because at the end of the day, it is the fertilizer market which will validate that what we have done is right. And for us, this will be a transformational moment, which will then accelerate everything, and obviously our ability to go into project 2, project 3.
When is that likely to happen? When are you likely to be able to announce that?
So for us, it's over the next couple of months. We will try to go faster. As I mentioned, things take a lot of time because you have to educate everybody. You have to educate the investors. You have to educate the banks. We've had support from the banks, very strong support. The IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, has announced they would, invest a large amount into the project when it's ready to project finance. And we are looking at, let's say, letters of interest from the banking world, which are twice more than what we need. So clearly, the banks get what we want to do, and they have climate commitment, but they understand that we have a real industrial project which has a logic and which is commercially viable. But now, obviously, we wanted to make sure that do we have a project which is de-risked? Can we finance it? Yes, we've proved that. Are the environmental social standards done? Yes, we have proven that. Has the government given us the authorization from Operation Environmental? Yes, it's done. So now it's all about presenting the absolute base case to the off-takers, to the investors, and then move on from that.
Do you need any more money to get to where you need to be to prove the project?
Thankfully, no.
Okay, so you're cashed out, ready to go. Yeah. Look, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I've got lots more questions. I guess it's really all about the process and so forth, but I think you've answered many of the questions I think investors want to know. The only one thing I would say to you is, if you were to be faced with an investor to say, why should I buy your shares? What would you say?
That's a fun question. So what I would say is really, look at the market, look at the reality of the market. Number one, are we cheap? Of course we are cheap. I think there is, the recognition that a lot of, let's say, renewable funds, have gone beyond the exuberance. And there's a reality that, we have hit a floor as a global market. But this is just macro. For where we are, why should they come into us? It's just like, because now we are at the point where we have de-risked 90% of everything that has to be de-risked. We are in this final 10%, which will be taken care of very, very shortly. And the other side is also realizing that you have a number of places where the hydrogen economy is really now finally coming through. If you look at, for example, I mentioned obviously fertilizer is one route towards monetizing hydrogen. Over the past few months, you've had a company called H2 Green Steel. It's not listed, it's private, and they have raised over $6 billion on an idea, on an industrial idea, and only because the off-takers, which is the people buying that green steel, came in and say, yes, I believe in it, and I am ready to pay X price for your green steel. We're talking BMW, Mercedes, and others. So it's all about proving that the market is there, right? And that is what we are doing is not different. It's fertilizer is fertilizer is fertilizer. It just happens to be zero carbon, right? So now we are at that point where we say, listen, we are at that point. Come in if you want to take, advantage of this big disconnect which is ready to happen. And believe in a management which has real skin in the game and is just not sitting comfortably, getting their paycheck, because this is not what we do.
And I guess it's just a matter of time before politicians get on this and say to food companies, you've got to be greener. You've got to have green fertilizer because it has to work in a zero carbon environment.
Because it is available. Right? Yeah. At the moment, it is very easy for the Nestlés of this world to say, okay, you are putting all of this rule on us, but where am I going to get that green fertilizer?
Atome.
Exactly.
Olivier, it's great to talk to you. Thanks indeed for joining me.
Thank you,
Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be able to catch up in person with you. It's Olivier Mussat, who's the chief executive of Atome, company moving fast in the green fertilizer sector.